All right, hey everyone. Welcome back to another segment of Tip Time, where we take a deep dive into your questions. Today's question is from Higo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's a great question with respect to cross-stepping. The question was how to make sure that you're cross-stepping backwards correctly. I think they were finding they were cross-stepping backwards and not placing their feet correctly on the board, finding difficulty tracking that along the stringer. So what I wanted to do today is just to provide a little bit of a taste test into, I guess, how I start to think about some of these things, the main problems that you might come across for this, and then how I like to think about, resolving this. So getting on top of identifying how to actually, or what areas you need to make sure you're focusing on, and then focusing on them and learning to improve that. So if we start with the main things that I see and the main things that we might need to try and, work on. The first thing that I see is that we're not actually committing our step backwards, and this is probably the main thing that does throw a lot of people off. So of course you can see the stringer when you're walking forwards, and so it's nice and easy to figure out where to place that foot. If we're walking backwards and we don't know where that stringer is and we're not taking a really committed step backwards, that's where we can get caught into a lot of trouble. I find the most often what happens is that the heel, or the foot will land on that heel side rail, and so then we'll wobble the board. You need to figure out which foot is doing this so that you know what to correct, but I think that getting on top of this is the number one thing to make sure you're figuring out to start with. And we've also got to make sure that we're staying nice and low. So if you are cross-stepping backwards, one of the biggest things or the biggest mistakes I see being made, especially if people are trying to commit their weight back, is that they straighten up their legs and they bend their back backwards, and they think that this is just creating more momentum going backwards, which is true, but it can be really, really tricky to keep your balance, and staying low is sort of how we keep our balance. And so there is a bit of a difference between, leaning backwards to transfer your weight backwards and actually keeping low and just making sure that we keep the upper body somewhat neutral, and then making sure we're shifting our weight back from our hips downwards. So yeah, I think the biggest thing there is leaning back is not necessarily how we commit our weight backwards. And we'll talk through a little bit of that in a second. And now that we've gone into a little bit of that, I think what we need to talk about is how do we identify what the problem is. So if you're having a little bit of trouble with your cross-stepping, you might have an idea of what's not working by your feel of how things are going out in the water. But how do we know exactly what we need to do to correct this and to make sure we're nice and balanced and doing it confidently? So this is the way I'd like to think about it, and if you have any questions, just let me know. But I think the best thing to start with is trying to get some film out in the water. There's nothing that beats this, because we actually get a visual representation of what's happening out there. You can pick out, okay, this is what the wave's doing, this is where I am on the wave, my back foot's doing this, my front foot's doing this. So it's a really, really good way to go about it. Now, if we can't get any film out in the water, that's okay. The second best thing, and this is probably something that I think a lot of you should try and do, because it is really, really helpful, and I've done it myself, especially when trying to teach myself to learn to switch cross step forwards and backwards. But it is actually, going back to last week's tip time, we're doing some land practice. Strip the fin out of your board, pop it on the grass, and practice your cross stepping. But before you practice, set up a phone camera, set up a normal camera to record yourself. Don't practice before you get the camera set up, and just off the bat, try your cross stepping forwards, try cross stepping backwards. And of course, try and make it as similar to what you do in the water as possible. I know that's pretty limited because, of course, it's very, very different, and we're less comfortable when we're in the water cross-stepping, so you'll feel more balanced on the land, obviously. But what this will do, and I think it's really, really helpful, is it will give you an insight into, I suppose, where your feet are landing. Now, it's important to know that, of course, we're going to stay balanced when we're on the land, but if you have a look at where your feet are landing, you might notice that one foot is actually landing off the stringer, so not across the stringer. And if you recognize this, then you'll be able to see that, okay, this foot isn't landing in the right spot. I need to correct this, because if I was out in the water, that would have made the board tilt. I wouldn't have been able to successfully make that cross step backwards. So that can be a really, really good thing to take on board. It's also really important to know which foot isn't landing on the stringer. Now, most commonly from what I find with the coaching that I do is that the back foot will actually be most likely to come off the stringer, so that say we're a natural footer, because most of you probably are, and we're cross-stepping backwards, that left foot is most likely to land right on the stringer. We're usually pretty comfortable with that. And then the right foot is actually going to land off that rail. So that's really something we want to make sure that we're getting on top of. The way that you'll know exactly which foot it is by looking and analysing your cross-stepping, either in the footage out in the water or also just on land. So that's something to really consider as well. Now, if you have gotten some footage out in the water or even of yourself on land cross-stepping and you still can't figure out what the issue is, I'm more than happy to have a breakdown of that with you through my coaching. We do online sessions where we can help with that if you would like to. But I think from there, it's just practice. The land practice is going to be really, really helpful for trying to consolidate that pattern, those neural pathways, to try and get that muscle memory to learn what it feels like to do the backwards cross-stepping. I can't speak highly enough of that for something like cross-stepping. It's really, really good at just making it feel nice and natural. And I think if you complement your normal surfing and practicing out there with some pretty committed cross-stepping practice on land, I think you'll notice some really, really good results there. It just makes it feel so much more comfortable, and I think from one session to another you will notice some big improvements there in terms of being able to feel comfortable and confident cross-stepping back, especially if you've identified those problems as being whether your front foot or your back foot's not landing on the stringer, whether you're not committing that weight backwards. That's going to be the really important things to look out for, and I think what you can make a really, really good inroads to. And to add a little bit to, I guess, some of the methods or what you can use to make sure that you're feeling a little bit more comfortable and confident with your cross-stepping. This is going to be, say, we're cross-stepping from the nose back to the middle of the board or back to the tail. It is okay to commit your weight backwards for the first two steps, but when you come after those first two steps, so now we've got, say again, you're a natural footer, left foot forward, right foot back, you can then reset or stabilize, similar to the step and reset method we use to cross step forwards. So you can stabilize, get your balance, and then begin cross stepping backwards again. Quite often, I think what can happen is we end up running off the back of the board because we've got so much momentum going backwards, and the board's speeding off forwards, and the board kind of speeds off underneath us. I like to use the example here of like we're taking off on a motorbike and we take off too quickly and the motorbike just goes out underneath us. So we can use the 2 steps back, reset, chest over front foot, balance, and then commit the next 2 steps backwards. Now, the other thing that I think is great to practice is if we're just getting used to our 2 cross steps back, or we're just getting used to cross stepping backwards in general, the biggest thing there is going to be making sure that we're not just cross stepping back from the nose, but we're practicing that from the middle of the board to the tail, just because in the nature of where we are on the board, that's going to be a more balanced position. And so you're going to have much more success there, rather than trying from the most difficult part of the board, which is up on the nose, and you're cross stepping backwards, which is, you're going to be a lot more rushed and it's going to be a lot more unstable. So I think beginning from the middle and cross stepping back to the tail is another great tip that I hope you guys can use, and hopefully that helps you out with your cross stepping and your cross stepping backwards. So just as a little recap there, what you need to do, I suppose, to feel more confident cross stepping backwards is going to be ensuring that you're identifying the correct area of what you need to focus on for your cross stepping backwards. So this will be the 2 likely things that I think this is likely to be is making sure that both feet, or if there is a foot that's not landing on the stringer, making sure you know which one that is and correcting that step, stepping back with intention to make sure that we're not just lazily putting a step back and intentionally placing it along the stringer there, and also making sure that we don't come and lean back too much. Again, if you're confident cross stepping backwards, the leaning back can be a really good stylistic element to add, but I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to do in terms of keeping balance with cross stepping, especially when you're learning, but certainly something great to add for a stylistic element later down the track. From there, what you're going to do is you need to try and identify all these elements and which one applies to you through some footage preferably, or you can get a mate to look at you, or again you can have my input if you would like there. Just feel free to contact us. But yeah, essentially making sure that you get some footage of some sort, whether that be out on the surf or on the beach, to see what problems are arising there. And then what we're going to do is make sure that we're practicing on land and in conjunction with the practice that you do out in the water as well. I think the more that you can practice to get that motor learning and the muscle memory for what that should feel like, and correcting the areas that you've identified are the problems, and then making sure that you translate that into the water and getting out and surfing, and practice is the main thing there. Repetition is the key. So I think that's going to do it for this week's Tip Time. Thanks everyone for watching. Hopefully you got a little bit out of it. I'd really love to know what you think of this, and I guess if it's helped at all. So let us know what you think. We'll have another Tip Time coming next week, and we've got the Sunday Glide coming up this Sunday, so make sure you stay tuned for that. If you do have any questions for next week's episode of Tip Time, make sure that you leave them in the comments below. Really love reading through them, having those conversations with you guys, and I think they're providing some hopefully useful information for you all. So we'll love to have a read through, and we'll choose one for next week. On top of that, again, designs coming along well for the clothing, so stay tuned for that as well. And yeah, I suppose we'll catch you on the next one. Hope everyone's getting waves. We'll see you soon. You.